The street was quiet in that heavyweight evenings sometimes feel when the day is tired and the sky is fading into a soft blue. Darius Holt walked with his shoulders low, a bag of groceries in one hand, his work badge tucked deep in his pocket. He wasn't thinking about danger. He was thinking about dinner, about calling his mother later, about getting some sleep before another long shift. Nothing more. Then a patrol car rolled up beside him, slow enough to make his stomach tighten. He kept walking, hoping they'd pass. They didn't. The car stopped. 2 officers stared at him through the window, their eyes already scanning him like he'd done something wrong just by existing on the sidewalk. That kind of look hits you before a single word is spoken. You can feel judgment reaching you first, before reason ever arrives. One officer stepped out, then the other. No greeting, no explanation. Just sharp voices barking, "Stop right there," as if he'd been running. Darius froze, his hands lifting slightly, the grocery bag dangling off his wrist. Before this story goes further, let me welcome you to Chronicles of Black. My name is Simmons, and if you're here, make sure you subscribe and share your thoughts in the comments. Your voice matters here. Darius tried to speak calmly, tried to keep his tone soft. "I'm just walking home," he said. But they weren't listening. They were looking past his words, past his face, past his humanity. One officer muttered something about a suspect in the area. A vague description. A tall black man. That was all it took for fear to twist into certainty in their minds. They moved fast. Too fast for anybody to explain anything. One grabbed his arm. The groceries spilled onto the pavement, eggs cracking, a loaf of bread rolling into the gutter. Darius barely had time to react before he felt a hard shove. His knee smacked the ground. Pain shot up his leg. Another shove forced him flat, his cheek scraping the concrete. He could taste dust in his mouth. His pulse hammered in his ears, louder than their shouting. "Why are you doing this?" he gasped. They didn't answer. They pressed his arms back, slapped cold metal around his wrists, and pinned him down like he was a threat, like he was an object that needed restraining. He felt a weight on his back, heavy enough to knock the air out of him. That helplessness, every black man in America knows that feeling. The moment when your voice doesn't matter, your explanations don't matter, and your fear is the only thing you're allowed to experience. He tried again, struggling against the pressure on his spine. "Check my wallet, please. Just check it." His voice cracked from the concrete grinding against his jaw. But they didn't. They kept barking orders he was already obeying, kept tightening cuffs that were already cutting into his skin. His groceries lay scattered, forgotten, while strangers slowed their cars, staring but not stopping. The sky dimmed a little more, and the sound of the officers' radios crackled somewhere close to his ear. Then everything stilled. For a moment the voices died down, leaving only the sound of Darius breathing shallow against the pavement. His heart felt like it was trembling inside his chest. No anger, no shouting, just that cold quiet that settles when you know the truth is about to surface, and no one else sees it yet. In that silence, Darius whispered the only words he had left. "You're making a mistake." One of the officers finally stopped shouting long enough to pat Darius down. It wasn't concern. It wasn't caution. It was habit, the kind that grows from believing you're always right, even when you aren't. His hands moved rough and impatient, checking pockets, tugging at fabric as if he was searching a criminal instead of a man who had already told them he'd done nothing wrong. Then the officer felt something small and firm in Darius's back pocket. He pulled it out with a quick, satisfied motion, expecting a wallet, maybe a license he could twist into some excuse. But when he opened the ID case, his breath hitched, his shoulders stiffened. For a moment he didn't even speak. He just stared at the metallic shine in his palm, that unmistakable silver glint staring right back at him. It wasn't a driver's license. It wasn't a student ID. It was a federal badge. A real one. Clean, sharp, legitimate. The officer blinked hard, like he couldn't trust his own eyes. "Hold on," he muttered, barely loud enough for the other officer to hear. He tilted the badge toward the streetlight, as if hoping it would turn into something else. It didn't. The truth hit him full force. He had a federal agent pinned on the ground, face scraped raw, groceries scattered, cuffs biting into his wrists. The second officer stepped closer and froze the moment he saw the badge. His face lost all color, like someone had drained him from the inside out. He whispered something under his breath, something shaky, something nervous because he knew exactly what they had done, and why they had done it. There was no real suspect, no real reason, just a quick judgment, born from the same place too many black men get trapped under. Meanwhile, Darius stayed on the ground. He didn't thrash. He didn't spit curses. He didn't demand anything. He just breathed slow, tasting the faint metallic temps of blood on his lip. There was a calm in him that wasn't peace, it was exhaustion. The kind that settles deep in a man who has lived this story too many times in too many different forms. The officer holding the badge swallowed hard. His hand shook. He looked at Darius like he was seeing him for the first time. Sir, we didn't know, he stammered. Darius didn't lift his head. You didn't ask, he said quietly. Those words landed heavier than any punch. The silence between them stretched. Cars slowed. People walking by stopped. One woman raised her phone, already recording. Another man whispered, "What's going on?" Someone else muttered, "Here we go again." The officers heard every word, every judgment, every breath of a crowd that had seen enough of these moments to recognize what was happening. The first officer scrambled to unlock the cuffs, his fingers fumbling so badly he dropped the key. He picked it up with a shaky curse and tried again, muttering apology after apology while avoiding Darius's eyes. We thought you matched the description, sir. Please just listen." But the damage didn't care about apologies. It sat there on the pavement with Darius heavy and cold. When the cuffs finally clicked open, Darius pulled his hands to his chest and slowly sat up. His wrist was red and swollen. His cheek was scraped raw. His groceries were smashed across the street like a picture of everything they'd ruined in just a few reckless minutes. More people had gathered now. Phones pointed like witnesses, waiting for the full truth. The officers knew exactly what was being recorded, their fear, their guilt, their mistake hanging in the air like smoke that wouldn't clear. Darius looked at them with a calm that cut deeper than anger ever could. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't lash out. He just breathed slow and steady, letting them sit in the silence they created, and that silence was louder than anything. Darius sat on the curb, with his elbows resting on his knees, his wrists still pulsing from the cuffs that had dug into them. The night air felt colder now, like the ground itself was holding the chill of what had just happened. The officers hovered a few steps away, pretending to be busy with their radios, but their eyes kept drifting back to him. They didn't know what to say. They didn't know how to stand. They didn't know how to undo the weight they'd put on his body or the bruise they'd left on his spirit. Darius stared at the cracked pavement between his shoes and let his mind drift back through the years, because moments like this never happen alone. They come with shadows, memories, echoes of stories passed down in hushed voices at dinner tables or whispered during car rides home. He thought of his father first, a tall, proud Vietnam veteran who survived a war overseas only to return home to suspicious eyes and whispered slurs. His father used to say, "You can wear the uniform, son, but the world still sees your skin before it sees your service." Darius remembered hearing that when he was 12, not fully understanding it then, but feeling the truth of it tonight more than ever. His mother came to mind, next soft-spoken patient, a school teacher who carried herself with grace even when the world didn't offer her any. He remembered the time she came home frustrated, telling him about the store clerk who followed her through every aisle as if she were hunting for something to steal. She laughed it off that night, but Darius had seen the hurt in her eyes, that quiet sting, that familiar pain so many black families learn to swallow. Then he remembered being 15, walking home with two friends after basketball practice. They were joking, laughing, being loud the way boys are when they don't understand how unforgiving the world can be. A patrol car rolled up, and before they knew it, an officer had shoved Darius against a wall, demanding to know what they were doing out this late. It was barely sunset. He remembered the fear, the confusion, the shame of being treated like something dangerous when he was just a kid, carrying a gym bag. All those moments stacked inside him like layers, and tonight added another one to the pile. Even with a federal badge in his pocket, even with years of training, years of discipline, years of service, he was still thrown to the ground without a question. He felt the heaviness in his bones, the kind that came from generations who had lived through the same script in different decades. He lifted his head slowly. The two officers stood nearby, their faces tight with guilt, unsure whether they should speak or stay silent. Darius didn't raise his voice. He didn't threaten them. He didn't wave his badge in their faces. He just spoke with a tired honesty. Double quotes. "Do you know how many times this has happened?" he asked softly. Neither officer answered. "My father wore a uniform, just like you," Darius said. "He fought for this country, came home and still got treated like a threat. My mother, she's been followed in stores her whole life. My friends, my cousins, me, since I was a kid." The officers stared at him then, really stared, like they were hearing something they'd never imagined they needed to hear. "You didn't see a man walking home," Darius continued, his voice steady but frayed at the edges. "You saw a danger that wasn't there. You didn't even ask my name." One of the officers swallowed hard, looking down at his boots. Darius let out a slow, shaken breath. "Even with this badge, even with everything I've done, somehow, it's still not enough to make you pause before you slam me to the ground." His words weren't angry. They were weary. They carried the weight of decades of his family's struggles, his own memories, and the quiet truth so many black men carry like a shadow that follows them everywhere. And as he sat there on that curb, bruised, scraped, humiliated, he felt something he'd felt too many times in his life. The exhaustion of always having to prove he belongs in a world that keeps demanding proof. The supervisor's SUV rolled up fast, lights flashing but siren off. The kind of arrival that says somebody already knows this is bad. The crowd had doubled in size by now. People stood shoulder to shoulder, arms crossed, phones out, anger simmering in their voices. Some whispered unbelievable. Others didn't whisper at all. The tension sat in the air like humidity before a storm. Darius pushed himself up from the curb. His legs were unsteady, sore from the takedown, but he stood anyway because sitting felt too close to defeat. He held his badge in his hand, and in that moment it felt heavier than anything he'd carried all week. Not because it had changed, but because the world around him suddenly had. The supervisor stepped out of the car, a middle-aged man with the kind of expression that tells you he's already preparing for paperwork, internal affairs, and sleepless nights. His eyes went from the officers, to Darius, to the crowd recording every second. He knew exactly what was happening before a single word was spoken. "What's going on here?" he asked, though his tone wasn't curious, it was cautious. The first officer jumped in, trying to explain, trying to patch the hole he'd blown through his own career. "Sir, we had a report of a suspect, and we believe." The supervisor held up a hand. "Stop." His gaze sharpened. "Did he resist?" "No, sir," the second officer said, voice small. "Did he pose a threat?" "No." "Did he identify himself?" "He tried," the first officer admitted, swallowing hard. The crowd responded with a loud murmur. People shook their heads. Someone shouted, "Tried. He tried." "You didn't even let him speak." Darius didn't need to raise his voice. His silence was loud enough. He stepped forward, standing right in front of the supervisor, his badge resting firmly in his palm. His cheek was scraped, his lip was bleeding, his wrists bore deep red marks that matched the tightness in his jaw. When he finally spoke, his tone was almost too calm. "They threw me to the ground before I could say a single full sentence," he said. "I told them to check my wallet. They ignored me. They treated me like I was hiding something dangerous when the only thing in my pocket was the badge I earned." The supervisor exhaled, heavy and slow. The badge in Darius's hand reflected the streetlight, and the supervisor's eyes lingered on it a little too long, as if measuring the weight of the mistake against the authority embossed on that metal. "You're a federal agent," the supervisor said quietly, not a question and acknowledgement. "Yes," Darius replied, "and they didn't verify your ID, didn't give you a chance to explain." Darius didn't blink. They never tried. The supervisor looked at his officers, and in that moment, the entire street felt the shift in awareness settling in, sharp and cutting. He didn't shout. He didn't curse. His disappointment was sharper than anger. "Both of you," he said, voice flat, "in the vehicle." Now, the officers hesitated, looking like men who suddenly realized they'd stepped off a cliff. They knew what this meant. They knew their body cameras had caught every second. They knew the phones in the crowd were capturing every detail. They knew the story was already bigger than their excuses. One officer tried to speak. "Sir, we can EXPL." "No," the supervisor snapped. "You've done enough damage for one night." A ripple went through the crowd. Some people nodded. Others muttered that it was about time someone said it plainly. The supervisor turned back to Darius with a seriousness that stripped away every layer of pretense. "Agent Holt, we'll need your full statement. Internal affairs will be notified immediately. You'll be taken to headquarters to document everything. Very sorry this happened." Darius didn't respond right away. He just looked at him, tired. Tired in a way that had nothing to do with his long work shift. "Sorry doesn't undo anything," Darius said gently. "It doesn't change why it happened." The supervisor didn't try to defend it. Maybe he couldn't. Maybe he finally understood that this mess wasn't just procedural, it was personal. It was historical. It was soaked in years of bias his department had never truly confronted. He gestured for Darius to follow him toward his vehicle. Darius stepped forward, slow and deliberate, every movement reminding him of the force used against him minutes earlier. Behind them, the officers were escorted away into another vehicle, their faces pale, their futures uncertain. The crowd slowly began to break apart, but not before several people called out to Darius, "We got it on camera. We saw everything. Stay strong. The air felt different now, heavy, charged, consequences forming in the dimming light, like a storm about to break. Darius stood there, badge in hand, bruised ribs rising and falling with each breath, realizing the truth of the moment. They didn't just assault a federal agent. They assaulted the very idea of justice they claimed to protect, and the only reason was the skin he'd been born in. The night had changed, and nothing about what came next would be simple. The street looks different in daylight, quiet, ordinary, almost peaceful. Darius walks slowly along the sidewalk, where everything changed. No flashing lights, no shouting, just the hum of cars passing and the warmth of the morning sun on his shoulders. He pauses at the spot where he was handcuffed, remembering the cold concrete beneath him and the weight of history pressing on his chest out now. The weight is still there, but lighter. In the days since the incident, accountability has taken its course. The investigation moved fast, too fast for excuses, too clear for anyone to rewrite the truth. One officer resigned, unable to face the consequences of his actions. Another was ordered into mandatory retraining, forced to confront the bias he had once denied. It doesn't erase what happened, and it doesn't rewrite centuries of injustice. But it's a step forward, one that matters. Darius takes a slow breath. He didn't want revenge. He never did. What he wanted was acknowledgement, humanity, respect. A world where a black man in a federal uniform is seen first as a man, not a threat. He turns toward the camera, speaking directly to the viewers now, not as a victim, not as a badge, but as a human being who refused to break. He talks about dignity, how easily it can be stolen and how fiercely it must be protected. He talks about judgment, the danger of letting fear and bias decide someone's worth. And he talks about justice, not as a perfect system but as a path, slow, uneven, but possible when people finally pay attention. His voice is calm, grounded, carrying the kind of strength that isn't loud but undeniable. He says prejudice doesn't always shout. Sometimes it whispers, sometimes it stands behind a badge or a title, and sometimes it strikes without warning. But truth has a way of rising, of exposing what was hidden, of leveling the ground again. As he stands tall on that quiet street, he leaves the audience with words that live long after the screen fades. My worth was never up for debate, and neither is yours. Stand tall, stay seen, and never let anyone tell you who you are. The final shot lingers on him, not broken, not angry, but steady. A reminder that dignity is its own kind of power, and justice, no matter how delayed, has a way of finding its way back home.